Good day, my juniors. This is Ms. Sanchez from biology class. We are ready to open our second partial, and we are going to do so with an introductory lesson to cells. But before we begin, I invite you to close your eyes and join me for a small prayer. Dear Lord, we give you thanks for this beautiful afternoon. We ask that you bless each student from the 10th grade and each family member of these students as well. Let this biology lesson be of great blessing to help us understand the way you have designed creatures all throughout the planet. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen. What follows, as usual, is a questionnaire that we should carefully answer in our notebook. This questionnaire is to be answered handwritten. When you're finished, please write your first name and your last name in the heading of each notebook page. And then take pictures of all the guide. Organize the pictures in a PowerPoint presentation and save the file with your first name and your last name as well. Then attach it to an email to the email address you have sent the previous assignments, which is mt.sanchez@sanjosedelcarmen.edu.hn. So the first question asks us, what are cells? And how did cells receive that name? Next is, who was Robert Hooke? Followed by, what are the three postulates of the cell theory? What are prokaryotic cells is next, followed by the question, what are the two domains of organisms that have prokaryotic cells? In number 6, we are asked to define a series of terms referring to one of these domains, and these are extremophiles, thermophiles, psychrophiles, acidophiles, alkalinophiles, and radiophiles. Number 7 is, what is an aquaponic system? Number 8, how do bacteria transform matter in aquaponic systems? Number 9, what are examples of pathogenic bacteria? And number 10, what are eukaryotic cells? Cells are the basic unit of life. And if you recall the lesson that we studied a few weeks ago called Levels of Biological Organization, you may remember how cells had a very important place in the levels of organization. Multicellular organisms like you and me have a great diversity of cells. These cells are differentiated so they can perform different structural and functional activities. When cells that are very similar group together, they form a tissue. And tissues that perform related functions form an organ. An organ, together with other organs that perform related functions, form an organ system. And the union of many interdependent organ systems forms an organism, like this cute little mice that you probably have in your kitchen right now. We have a question asking us, who was Robert Hooke? Robert Hooke was an English experimental scientist from the 1600s. Robert Hooke was a person with a great creativity, and his scientific contributions are in a variety of disciplines, from biology to medicine to planetary physics to architecture. One of the most important inventions made by Robert Hooke was this rudimentary but very useful microscope, the first of his time. Microscopes, as you know now, are important because they help us understand the world at a microscopic level. This is a diagram that shows the parts in the first microscope made by Robert Hooke. And to try his new invention, he decided to cut a very thin slice of cork. Cork is a material that, for those that maybe don't remember it right now, is used as a bottle cap of wines, and it is also used in cork boards, Spanish pizarra de corcho. So cork is a material that is organic. It is carbon-based and it comes from plants. So when he was making his observations of the piece of cork, Robert Hooke noticed these teeny tiny little but very organized squares in the sample. These little squares that we see around here reminded Robert Hooke of little rooms, little bedrooms, where Roman Catholic monks went inside to pray and meditate in the teachings of the Bible. Now, these little rooms that monks use are called cells, and that is where the name comes from. It is very curious to note that Robert Hooke was a person from humble origins. He was the son of an Anglican bishop in England, and his daddy died when he was only 13. They didn't have any money, but he was blessed with great creativity. So, with his creativity and the help of other people who sponsored them in various scholarship programs, he ascended to great positions in society, becoming the director of the Royal Society of London. When you are very successful, there is a high cost for it as well, because it brings along the envy of others. One of these was surprisingly Sir Isaac Newton, which you may remember from your physics class. And the reason was because Robert Hooke, very creative, complete genius, had ideas that were new and that were very similar to the ideas of that Sir Isaac Newton was developing in the moment. And two of these ideas are, first, he suggested that light travels in the form of waves and that it is not an example of matter, but instead it is energy that travels as waves. But you may remember from your physics class that that idea of light traveling as waves instead of particles is attributed to Sir Isaac Newton and not to Robert Hooke. Secondly, because they had differences in who should take the credit for the universal law of gravitation, which you may remember from your physics classes, that the credit is taken by Sir Isaac Newton and not Robert Hooke. So, Sir Isaac Newton felt jealous of Robert Hooke because his ideas were very similar to his and there were differences on who should take the credit for them. So when Robert Hooke died, Sir Isaac Newton eventually became one of the directors of the Royal Society of London, and his jealousy and rivalry for Robert Hooke was such that he commanded to set fire to the library of books written by Robert Hooke and also to the only known portrait of Robert Hooke. Envy or jealousy is a natural feeling, and we all feel jealous and envious every so often. Maybe because of physical characteristics that others have, or intellectual achievements, or even very dumb things. But jealousy is a feeling that, though is natural, it can be very unhealthy. 1 Corinthians 13:4-5 remind us that love is not proud, that love is not envious, and love is not rude. When you feel jealous or envious of somebody, talk to God about this feeling. Ask Him for guidance to help you address this feeling correctly. And if it is possible, approach this person to get to know him or her better. Next in the list of microscope inventions was one made by a merchant of fabrics called Anthony van Leeuwenhoek. So Anthony van Leeuwenhoek did not belong to the scientific community. Instead, he sold fabric, era un comerciante de telas, and he made this new version of an optic microscope that was actually very handy in that it was small, and the little hole that you notice here is the place through which you place your eye to see your specimen through. Not only that, but in his spare time he was very curious, so he liked to try his new invention to put samples of everything he could find in the way. He was the first person to actually record observations of microscopic organisms such as bacteria and even sperm cells. The contributions made by people like Robert Hooke or Anthony van Leeuwenhoek with the microscopes and the observations under the microscopes eventually led to something that we know as the cell theory. The cell theory was developed by three scientists, Matthias Schleiden, Theodor Schwann, and Rudolf Virchow. And in simple words, these are the three postulates of the cell theory. First, that all living things are made up of cells, from our pet to a basketball player to a plant to a fungi. Everything is made up of cells, and that is the reason why viruses contradict the first postulate of the cell theory, because viruses are not made up of cells. Instead, they are made up of a protein capsule that has inside nucleic acids that can change the way that the host cell operates and become very dangerous, as we have experienced lately. Second postulate, cells are the basic units of structure and function in living things. And this is why cells are highly differentiated in complex organisms like you or me. And we have thus adipose or fat cells, we have muscle cells, we have cells that form connective tissues or nervous tissues or muscle tissue or fat tissue. And so they are very, very complex in how they work internally, using biochemical reactions to perform many of the activities. Third postulate, new cells are produced from pre-existing cells, which leads us to think that if you see a cell, then that cell should have come from another cell. Next in our discussion is more than a comparison between prokaryotic and eukaryotic cells. We are going to focus on the importance that prokaryotic organisms have for this first lesson. Prokaryotic cells are unicellular organisms that lack organelles or other internal membrane-bound structures, which in simple words describes cells that are at the same time unicellular organisms that are very, very simple in its internal anatomy and that are very ancient as well. Very simple and very ancient, but very, very important, with various roles in the ecosystem and also in the human body. Prokaryotic cells or prokaryotic organisms belong to two major domains, domain archaea and domain bacteria. The first one for our discussion is domain archaea. Domain archaea are organisms that we like to refer to as extremophiles, hence the prefix extremo for extreme, and this is because they like to live in extreme habitats that humans, for example, wouldn't be able to survive in. And these are the extreme habitats that we are going to study for this lesson. The first are very, very hot places. And these very, very hot places that very few species could survive in is sometimes the perfect habitats for archaea organisms known as thermophiles. These are archaea organisms that live in extremely hot places, very hot places, thermophiles. Next in the list are psychrophiles, and psychrophiles are archaea organisms that have the ability to live in extremely cold places. Psychrophiles, archaea organisms with the capacity to live in extremely cold places. Next in the list are halophiles. So when we refer to the prefix halo in the scientific context, we are referring to high concentrations of salt. Spanish, sales. So halophiles are prokaryotic organisms that have the ability, the capacity to live and resist in places with high concentrations of salt. Next in our list are amazing microscopic organisms from the archaea domain that have the capacity to, for example, inhabit places where the pH levels are way below 7, or places that are very, very acid, and these are known as acidophiles. We also have archaea members that can resist opposite habitats. In this case, habitats with very alkaline pH levels, known as alkalinophiles. In daily conversations and previous knowledge, it's very easy to identify acid substances such as lemon juice or battery acid or gastric juices. But alkalinophiles are on the other side of the spectrum, and they describe substances like chlorine or cloro, the ones that we are using nowadays very much to disinfect. So chlorine is toxic if used improperly because it is very alkaline, or it has a pH level way above 7, as we will study further in chemistry classes. Archaea organisms that are called radioactive resistant are those capable of resisting great concentrations of ionic radiations that would be lethal to us, like if you remember the Chernobyl accident in Ukraine of the Soviet Union, that because of the explosion of this nuclear plant, then great concentrations of ionic radiations were freed into the atmosphere and affected the lives of many humans and plants and animals. But archaea organisms do resist radiation in great magnitude, more than we do. The next domain, besides archaea, is bacteria. Now, when we think of bacteria, we think of these nasty microscopic organisms that we can't see, but we want to protect ourselves from because we associate them with disease. And that is true. Many bacteria are indeed pathogenic, but there are many kinds of bacteria that do not cause prejudice to the human body and that have great roles in the ecosystem. So we are going to study one of these examples. So we have bacteria organisms that transform matter, and what we see in the picture is an aquaponic system. In an aquaponic system, the idea is to grow plants like these lettuces over here without using soil as a substrate and without depending on commercial inorganic fertilizers to make these plants grow. Instead, an aquaponic system is made of 3 components. Write it down. It is made from bacteria, fish, and plants. And this is how it works. You see here that there's water, and this is because this is a fish tank. What looks in blue is a fish tank, and we can also note the fish, the little fish that live inside this fish tank. These fish poop, and the poop of fish is actually toxic to plants. So bacteria of 2 different genus are used to transform the chemical substance in normal poop to a substance that the plant can use to grow big and healthy. So this is the summary of how the process works. Fish poop, and the feces of fish have high concentrations of a chemical substance known as ammonia. Ammonia cannot be used by a plant, so it needs an intermediate, in this case a bacteria of a genus known as Nitrosomonas. Nitrosomonas is a bacteria that takes in ammonia and through a series of biochemical reactions transforms it into a different chemical substance known as nitrite. Nitrite. Then we have nitrite, that is not a fertilizer for the plant and needs to be converted into nitrate. And this is possible thanks to the help of a second genus of bacteria known as Nitrobacter. Nitrobacter takes in nitrite, ITE, and through a series of biochemical reactions, transforms it into nitrate, ATE. At the end, when you have nitrate in the system, this nitrate is used as a fertilizer to plants so they can grow very big and very healthy lettuces or strawberries or whatever it is that you're growing in your aquaponic system. Aquaponic systems are a great alternative to traditional agriculture, and this is because there is less water waste, a considerable less amount of water waste, and also because it does not depend on soil fertility and commercial fertilizers to grow the plants that you intend to grow in the system. Next in the list are pathogenic bacteria, the ones that you may have heard of before in previous biology classes, where we talked about the effects of Helicobacter pylori bacteria infection, which we can catch from contact with contaminated fecal matter and that inhabit organs like our stomach, causing injuries known as ulcers, which can eventually lead to stomach cancer. We also discussed about E. coli, which we do have actually in our body, but when the concentrations of the colonies of the bacteria grow too large, then it becomes a great problem as well. Our example, the one that we should have in our notebook, is this pathogenic bacteria known as Neisseria gonorrhea. Neisseria gonorrhea is a pathogenic bacteria that we can catch through sexual intercourse. Neisseria gonorrhea frees or releases toxins that change the normal function of the body, and among the symptoms of gonorrhea is one known as gonorrhea eye. So gonorrhea eye is very characteristic in adults that have gonorrhea. And not only that, but if a woman is pregnant and this woman has not been diagnosed yet with gonorrhea and has a baby through natural labor, then the baby runs the risk of being born blind. And this is because if this baby has physical contact with a contaminated genital zone of a woman that has gonorrhea, then he can catch a serious bacterial infection as well, which can cause permanent blindness to the baby. So how is this avoided? I'm talking about the part where the baby is born blind. It is avoided by practicing the pregnant woman a C-section and thus avoiding that the baby's face has contact with the vagina of the sick mom. So sex is very important, and the Bible addresses many ways in which sexuality is a gift from God that should be used responsibly. We avoid so much trouble like getting STDs or sexual transmission diseases like gonorrhea simply by changing our mindset. That is, if you plan to form a family, then we can wait for the right person and then form a stable marriage with this person. And if you and your spouse have promised to be faithful to each other, that translates in reducing very, very much the chances of getting sick of diseases like these. 2 slides and we're done. Eukaryotic cells, which is the kind of cells, which are the kinds of cells that we are going to focus for the entire partial, are cells that contain a nucleus. Prokaryotic cells, they don't contain a nucleus, and they don't have organelles like eukaryotic cells have. Thus, eukaryotic cells are very complex in structure and function. And one of the main characteristics is that the cell membrane and the organelles are made by systems of membranes. Eukaryotic cells are found in all multicellular organisms, like this plant, like this flower over here. This flower is made from eukaryotic cells, or this frog, or this monkey, or this squirrel, or this cute athlete over here, or this dolphin, or this baby unborn elephant, or this prey bird called caracara, which you can find if you decide to visit parks like El Picacho or Rosie Walter Zoo. Then you can find this bird of prey like caracara. So this is it for today, guys. I wish you a very blessed and productive week, and I will see you later through the week for history class. I think that's on Saturdays, and also chemistry class. Bye bye now. God bless you.